Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for coming to this. This is super fun.
It's funny that Jason approached me about it because I've been thinking about doing something like this for like a little bit now. I love talking about plants. So yeah, I'm glad you guys are here. Hopefully it's you can get something out of it and a little bit enjoyable experience. So houseplant care 101. So here's a bit of an outline. We'll cover initially why caring for houseplants is kind of tricky, why you might be running into some of the challenges you might be running into with houseplant care. We'll cover some basic needs of plants, soil, water, and light, kind of establish a baseline, if you will, for kind of understanding what a plant needs. Then we'll have a fun little activity of figuring out your context and practicing what it's like to figure out your context. And then we'll cover very briefly just a couple plants that you might consider as like a beginner, some easy entry-level house plants. So, and then at the end, we might give away some plants too. So why caring for houseplants is tricky. So I'm sure this has happened to many of you before, but you go to the store, you see a plant and you're like, oh, it's cool. I would love to, I'm going to take this home. You buy it and it looks great and you put it up on your bookshelf or wherever and it's great for a couple weeks. And then maybe a month or two goes by and it starts kind of looking like that, kind of discolored, maybe it's getting a little leggy, kind of pale. Just not looking very healthy anymore. This has happened to me dozens of times. It's a common problem. Oops. There we go. This one on the left, maybe you had a plant that was doing really well, and then suddenly it breaks out in disease or bugs or something. These little white things are, it's a mealyworm or mealy scale or something like that. They reproduce asexually, so if there's like one, it'll just like proliferate and you can't stop them. You have to kill every single one or else they'll keep growing. Or maybe you had a plant that sat on your windowsill for like months and months and months and did literally nothing until one day you kind of poke it and you like lift it up and there's like no roots or anything.
Or
it's
a spider inside.
Or there's a spider living inside or something like that. Yeah, these are normal problems. These are problems that if you have a houseplant or have cared for houseplants for any length of time, these are common problems that you run into. And the reason it's hard is that our plants that we're bringing into our homes we're subjecting them to a wildly different set of growing conditions. So let's look at an example. So the Sedum morganianum, I think I pronounced that right. It's Latin, so I don't know, is that first plant we saw. So if you go back real quick. So this guy, this is donkey tail or the Sedum morganium. I pulled this quote just from Wikipedia. It's been found in the wild in two ravines in Tenampa County in central Veracruz in eastern Mexico on vertical cliffs of igneous rock in the tropical deciduous forest zone. So I found this image. So this is it growing in the wild. This kind of looks like an artificial rock wall, but I think it's a good like depiction of kind of the environment it's growing in, right? It's grown out of a crack in the wall, blasted by the harsh Mexican sun. It's probably pulling all the moisture that it needs like from the air or as rain is trickling down the side of this mountain. And then we take this plant and we put it in a little hanging pot in our house and just expect it to magically do okay. It's good to know where does it grow well originally so we can better emulate those conditions in our home. Here's another example. Our homes are generally pretty inhospitable to most plants. So one example is humidity level. So most homes have a humidity level of like 30 to 45 degrees, right? And then you add air conditioning, heaters, box fans, and it just further dries things out, especially in the wintertime with heaters running all the time. It can get pretty dry, like into the 15th percentile. Now a Monstera, that's this plant here on the right, they come from the tropics of like the Americas. They generally don't grow any higher than like 200 feet above sea level. So imagine like coastal, tropical, super wet conditions, yeah? And then we take this plant home and we put it in these super dry environments. They're used to like 60, 90% humidity, and then suddenly it's super dry and it just doesn't succeed well. So understanding that can help us grow plants better. So you don't have a black thumb, your house does. it's always funny to me when someone like sees like a beautiful garden like in front of our house and it's like, oh wow, you have a green thumb. All I have is a couple of houseplants. And I always say, I think houseplants are like, keeping houseplants is way harder than having like an outdoor garden, because you're bringing the plants into a space that they don't normally grow in. And so you have to overcome some obstacles. You can still do it. There's lots of ways you can do it, but it's a little tricky. So let's cover just some basic needs of plants. We'll start with the foundation, soil. So why does soil matter? This is some participant interaction time. Why does soil matter? This isn't like a trick question.
Okay, nutrients.
Nutrients, totally. Yep. That's what the plants eat. Yep.
It impacts how wet the roots will be.
That's a good point. Yeah, water retention is a huge part of the soil composition. Yeah. Any others? These are all great. Yeah. So the nutrients and water retention are maybe the two most significant things regarding your houseplants, right? Because out like just outside, right, the plant can reach out and it's got lots of dirt to work with. But when it's in a pot, the soil that's in there is the soil it has, and so it's got to pull all the nutrients it needs from the soil. I thought it would be helpful to just briefly note the difference between soil you have outside, like just in the ground, dirt, and potting soil, because there are some significant differences. So soil outside is going to be made up of either clay, sand, or silt loam. We're more on this clay end of the spectrum. So fine particles, it's really good at water retention. It's really dense, heavy soils. And it also has organic matter in it. Silt loam is like ideal farming soil. Sadly, we don't have that here, but that's okay. You can move towards more hospitable soil with organic matter. Potting soil is generally going to be made up of a much lighter medium. So things like peat, coconut coir, which is like finely shaved like coconut husks that have been like reduced to this really fine sort of medium. There's companies that like take paper and wood products and kind of mulch them up until it's a really fine product. And all of these kind of carry, think of it as like something that carries all the things that the plant needs. Peat will give some nutrients. All of these things will give some nutrients, but generally you're going to be adding things to give the nutrients to the plants. Vermiculite. So I don't know if you've ever had like a bag of soil, those like white things, little white specks of white stuff in the potting soil. That's vermiculite. That's for water retention, as well as aeration to allow spaces for oxygen to be present in the soil, as well as absorb water. You might have some granulated fertilizers. I tend to avoid potting soils with granulated fertilizers, just because I like to use organic fertilizers generally. But they'll be in there. They will dissolve over time with water application. And then again, organic matter. I'll talk a little bit on that in just a second. So the point I would have you guys walk away with as regards to soil is healthy soil is living soil. So there's a ton of really cool research that's come out on soil science regarding the microbiome of the soil, all the bacteria and the fungi that are living in the soil that are in symbiosis, if you will, with the plant roots. There's a lot of really cool studies of how the plant will actually put out sugars into the soil for like the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria to eat. And in return, those things will give the plants their essential nutrients and stuff. Really cool research. So it behooves us to cultivate a living soil, as it were. And the key to having good living soil is organic matter. If you feed the soil will feed your plants. So in a houseplant context, that can look a few different ways. One of the best fertilizers that I've used is like fish water, like from an aquarium. So all that fish poop, if you're cleaning out your fish tank and you water a plant with it, it's a great nitrogen-rich fertilizer that also is loaded with good bacteria that then break it down and feed it to the plants. That's a little bit harder to get to if you don't have an aquarium. Another thing I do around here is I use my old coffee grounds. So I have a little French press I use every morning. I take the old grounds and I just dump it on top of a plant, and those will break down over time, and it's a slow release of nitrogen into the potting soil. Things like putting old like sticks and wood into the bottom of the pot and potting soil on top. That's a really great amendment as well. Crushed leaves, you can buy like a bag of like pine shavings, like at a pet store, you can put that on top. Those are all good amendments that you can add to feed the soil, which then feeds your plants. So some other tips for healthy houseplant soil: invest in quality soil. If you could spend money on a lot of things in caring for houseplants, the best thing to spend money on is the soil. Getting like a bag of Miracle-Gro from Home Depot it's not very good soil. It's not been, I would say, thoroughly processed enough, and is generally a texture that's hard for plants to work with. My favorite like potting soil brand is Happy Frog. It costs like $40 for like a big bag of like 3 cubic feet. That's pretty expensive for potting soil, but it's also really good soil that is really easy for the plants to grow in. So I would say invest in quality soil. Everything else you can do pretty cheaply. Cover your soil. So this is something that a lot of people, I would say, don't do with houseplants. I don't know if you've ever like gone to water a houseplant and it's like super crunchy soil and the water like pools up and then kind of just goes out the bottom.
Yes.
Well, covering your soil actually helps. What do I mean by covering the soil? It can look a few different ways. You could use like a rock, like gravel or something. That'll cover your soil and help keep water retention in. For a lot of, I generally do that with like cactus and things. You could also use leaves. I just go out, grab some leaves, crunch them up, put them on top, and that does wonders for helping increase your water retention. Those will break down over time and be another thing that feeds the soil. Those are both great options. And the nice thing with leaves is they're free, so it's inexpensive to do. If you want to do something that looks a little nicer, you could like get some processed mulch. Again, pine shavings from like a pet store would work well for that, and it would look a little nicer, a little cleaner. But yeah, and then using organic fertilizers, we've talked a lot about that already. So next is water. I think a lot of people, one of the initial challenges is like, how much do I water my plants? How many times do I water it? When do I know when to water it? And the tricky thing is each plant is kind of context dependent, right? It's plant dependent and context dependent. However, I would say most plants like even moisture. So not waterlogged, not like drying out completely, but even moisture in the soil is ideal for a lot of plants. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. However, I'd also say that one of the common mistakes people encounter is overwatering plants. They get a new plant, they get super excited, and they keep watering it, and it just rots, right? That's, I would say, generally the mistake people tend to fall into. Plus, when you underwater a plant, it'll usually tell you when it's when it needs more water, right? Another way of checking if your plant needs water is the finger check method, and I actually need a volunteer to help me with this. Would anyone be willing?
Don.
Go for it, Don. So I have 2 plants here, so you can come up here. So I want, with one finger, stick your finger into the soil, just kind of wiggle around in there or whatever, and then with your other finger, not the same finger,
Okay.
Stick it in there, wiggle it around.
Yeah, there's a big difference.
Yeah. So you can hold up your fingers and show them. So the one on the right,
Let's try.
yeah. Notice how your finger on the right is a lot dirtier, like the soil adhered to your finger. That lets you know that it's got enough moisture in it. If you pull your finger away and it's clean, probably needs more water. So that's a really quick, easy way of assessing, like, does it need water? There's still some water in there. I can probably wait a day or two. With things like cactus, you can let it dry out more completely between each watering. They're used to that. But that's a good method that you can use. So yeah, each plant is different, but in general, cacti and succulents need longer stints without water. Can already mention that. And just to specify, cactus, obviously have thorns. Succulents are kind of the fleshier-leaved plants. This is a good example. So this is, I think, bear paw is the common name of it. But the leaves are like kind of fat. They've got some like squishiness to them. This is a good example of a succulent. And then, of course, cactus. Whereas leafy plants need more regular watering, shorter periods of time between each watering. This is a coleus, leafier kind of geranium. Each of these are kind of leafier. Those are gonna need more watering. But again, let the plant tell you what it needs. If it's looking droopy, give it some water. If it's doing fine and you watered it and then the soil is still moist, just go without watering it. And plant needs will also change throughout the season. So if the plant's actively growing, it's going to be taking up more water. All right, the last one is light. We're almost through all of my talking part, and then you guys get to do something. So here's some more images. Here's that first one we looked at, a plant that was really struggling for light. I'm almost certain if you've had a succulent of any kind, you've seen something like this. It'll like start kind of like getting really lanky and long and whatnot. This guy over here, it's lost a lot of the leaves on the lower portions of its stem. It's looking like it's alive, but it's struggling. These are all indications of the plant needing more light. So why does this happen? So plants need light to photosynthesize. I'm sure you guys all know that. But a leggy plant is an indication that a plant is desperately trying to access more light. So if you think about it, if you're a plant and it's spring and you've just emerged out of your seed and you're growing and suddenly it's gotten shady around you. Maybe a plant has grown up beside you that's growing faster than you. Maybe there's an oak tree that's finally like leafed out. You're like, oh no, I gotta get to more light, because if I don't, then I'm not gonna be able to like feed myself, right? So start growing, trying to find the light, growing towards the light, elongating in like this desperate attempt to access more light, right? Unfortunately, when we bring the plants into our house, this survival strategy doesn't actually help, because the light it has is the light it has. It doesn't matter if it can't break through a window, right? So that's what happens, right? It elongates and it's just not able to get any more light from that strategy. So let it be a cue for you, like, oh, this plant needs more light. Whatever condition it's in, I need to help address it. So speaking of knowing, like, initial setup, like how could I know does this plant need a lot of light? Does it need a little bit of light? Maybe you're at the store and you're looking at these tags and things. I thought it was helpful to cover this very briefly. They give an idea of some basic light requirements for your plants. I would always advise, look up the species. Like you can see salvia. It says full sun, but it says salvia. That's a very general description. Well, there's a billion salvia species, but you could look up salvia and understand, oh, this is a prairie plant. It's like 12 hours of sunlight. Probably should not try to make this a house plant. Let's see, what was my next one? Yeah. However, any plant that is indoors, it must have light. Even shade-loving plants will still need supplemental light if they don't have access to a window. So that tag may say full shade, right? But that tag might also be under the assumption of oh, they're going to plant this plant outside, right? So if you bring it indoors and it's not near a window, there's no lamp or anything, it's still going to languish, because even in those contexts, it needs some light. So it can be kind of like a guidepost, give you a rough idea, but it's helpful to look into it a bit more and do some research. So windows. Here's a fun little game. Okay, so this is a house. Here's a little sector compass. You got north, west, south, and O. I don't know why the sector compass has an O instead of an E for east. But this is your house. I don't know. I just pulled it from Google and it was the nicest looking one. So that's the one I used. But you got a house and a window on each side of your house. So question for you all. Which window do you think would give the most light for your plants? That's a great suggestion, Faye. I love it.
The southern window.
Ooh, southern window. Any other thoughts? Southern? Yeah. East. No, that's a good thought. It's a good thought.
Oast.
Or Oast, yes. Oast. So this is actually a bit of an unfair question because it changes throughout the season. A better question would be, which window gives you the least amount of light? Anyone got any thoughts on this? Oh yeah, the one that has the most shade. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Would it be north?
It would be north. Do you know why?
Because we're in the northern hemisphere.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's cool. You can go play ping pong, okay?
You hit the ball with the paddle.
Yeah, so as the Earth is on its axis, right, in the wintertime, the sun is lower in the southern hemisphere. So it actually rises in the southeast, will arc across the southern sky, shining into your southern window, and then set more so in the southwest. Now in the summertime, it rises more directly east to west. So your southern window actually won't get as much sun in the summertime, but your east and west will get a lot more sun. Your west window specifically will get blasted with that hot afternoon sun, you know, like the hottest part of the day, just gonna be baking in that windowsill. North window is never gonna get much light. So north, least amount of light, cold and dark. South, the most light in the winter. It's an ideal spot in the winter. There's less light in the summer. East is gentler morning light, and then west is intense light in the summer. So that's helpful for thinking through. Yeah. Go ahead, take a picture. Cool. Now, let's say, man, I have no ideal windows. In fact, I'd say like the B apartments, not super great in terms of windows. The guest house, the lobby area, you have the big windows towards the back. You guys have a great spot. It's like a southwest-ish facing window. So you get a lot of nice winter light coming in, you know, you're having pizza night in the winter and the sun just blasting you in the face. You know, the plant, it's great for houseplants. But a lot of homes in Texas, I've noticed, have really bad windows. They're not very big. They don't let a lot of light in, and they're usually on the wrong side of the house, generally. So how do you fix that? You do it with lamps. So this is, I'll confess right now, is maybe like at the periphery of like my knowledge, and I definitely have knowledge gaps in this area. In general, for houseplants, rule of simplicity, the more lumens, the better. So if you have like a light bulb, it'll tell you like 200 lumens. I've read that like the 400 to 600 lumen range is like ideal for houseplants. When I like go to like Home Depot or something, most light bulbs seem to like be around the 200 range, unfortunately. You need like a higher wattage lamp to get more lumens. So what I've found is that even just a simple like IKEA lamp that's like directional like this, kind of shining down directly on it, is better than nothing. In fact, I've been growing these cactus pretty much completely under a lamp for a while, and they're kind of a little bit leggy up top, I would say. They probably need a bit stronger light. But what was that? Oh, the snake plant too has also been growing under a lamp. So you can do it. And again, let the plant tell you what it needs. You might be asking, what about grow lights, right? So yeah, Jason picked up
one from boutique today.
Yeah, it's super cool. Like
what is this? He's like, it's a grow light. I was like, good grief! It was the day of the plant presentation.
Excellent. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, grow lights are really cool. I use them for seed starting. Grow lights tend to be like really, really bright, so that it really stimulates plant growth. I would say for like a house plant context, you don't need to have a grow light necessarily, because you're not like growing a pot of basil that you're like constantly harvesting from. You're just trying to like provide enough light for the plant's needs and not necessarily like really kick the plant to high gear for growing. But you can totally like look online, see if you can find like an economical grow light. One other thing I might mention is a lot of them have like these weird like color spectrums. And that's like gets into a weird whole confusing thing. I'd say just full spectrum. If you go for that, that'll cover your needs. There's a bunch of weird science. I shouldn't say weird science. A lot of really complex science that suggests like, oh, wavelength of this kind encourages more like vegetative growth. This will kick it into flowering. That's all too complex for houseplants, I would say. Just get a full spectrum light. Even just a basic lamp will meet a lot of your lighting needs, I'd say. And again, the plants will tell you if they need more light. If they're getting leggy, give them more light. If they're starting to like crisp up a bit, plants can actually sunburn in windows. It's like, ooh, that's too much light. Put them in a shadier spot, or like in a, north facing window, east facing window. Yeah.
Will,
Yes.
can you run, so say you have like a 200 lumen light.
Yeah.
And you're like, this isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But can you, if you have it in a room, can you run it like 24/7? Or do plants need darkness?
That's a good question. So plants don't need darkness. Well, I shouldn't say plants don't need darkness. They will reach a maximum amount of time. Like if they get 10 hours of sunlight, then, and it's like a cutoff point where the light is no longer effective at actually encouraging them to keep growing. Some plants will have like mechanisms that are triggered depending on the amount of light they're getting. Like Christmas cactus, a pretty common house plant, they'll actually start blooming when light decreases. The amount of light in a day decreases. So for a lot of people, Christmas cactus don't bloom in the house because we keep our lights on all night or like late into the evening. And so the Christmas cactus is like, guess it's still summer, don't need to bloom yet. So yeah, I would say 24-hour light is at the very least it's not going to help your plant additionally. It's more the brightness of the light that matters. So now we've come to a participatory part of the presentation.
What if you have two lamps at the same time? Would brightness add up?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. If I had to guess, and this is a guess, I would need to do more research to answer definitively. I would guess no, because the light's just coming from a different direction and it's not like brighter. But I could be wrong about that. So definitely, you could look it up and see. All right. So let's see. Do we have enough people for 3 groups? I brought this book. I really like this book. It covers some like basic how to like growing of house plants and whatnot, and it's got all these like plant profiles in the back, so you can kind of like go through here and it'll tell you more information about them. So a book like this is really helpful.
What's it called?
It's just called House Plants: The Complete Guide to Choosing, Growing, and Caring for Indoor Plants. You're more than welcome to look at that.
Cool.
But some ones to start off with, pothos is a super easy, readily available plant. It does well in low light levels and infrequent watering. It's an ivy that grows in tropical areas. So if you imagine like it's growing up trees and getting water from the as rain falls on the tree, it goes down the trunk. So they're like pulling it from there, and it's kind of like shady conditions. It's really easy to propagate from cuttings. There's a ton of it in the guest house that's been growing for years and years and years. All the pothos in my house came from there. So they're pretty easy to grow from cuttings and a good beginner plant. I mentioned aloe vera. It's super drought tolerant, easy to grow, succulent. It prefers a lot of light when it's indoors, so that might be a restraining factor. It'll also self-propagate from pups. It'll send out these like little side shoot plants that you can like just yank off and plant and start growing. And this one's cool. You can use it for sunburns and make like your own like skincare kind of stuff. So that's kind of fun if you're into that sort of thing. I like plants that have lots of different uses.
Yeah.
A little bit of utility to them. So I mentioned the Christmas cactus. It's pretty low maintenance. Prefers a lot of light. Fix that typo. Prefers a lot of light, but can be tolerant of low light levels. It's also pretty easy to propagate from cuttings as well. Here's one in bloom. I actually have one that's almost this exact flower color. Really beautiful, beautiful plant. The mini umbrella tree, I actually had one of these when I was in college, and then it died from root rot. But it prefers a lot of light, water sparingly, but there's lots of beautiful variegated varieties. Variegated means that there's like white in the leaves and stuff like that, which look really cool. So here's one that's a little more water intensive, the polka dot plant. You want some more gentle lighting, so like an east facing window. Keep it evenly moist. Don't let the soil dry out. It comes in some cool colors like pink and white and red. And I think that's all the ones I included in this one. But yeah, that gives you some initial ideas. I mean, anything that they're selling in Home Depot or like Lowe's or like a Cox Nursery. I don't know if you're familiar with that in Duncanville. They've got a lot of really cool houseplants too.
That's cool.
So yeah, there's some options for you. But yeah, this concludes the presentation. Yeah. Oh yeah. Questions. Yes.
So you talked about low humidity in houses.
Yes.
Does it help if you kind of mist the plant?
Yeah. So I would say it doesn't hurt. What I've read and heard is that it doesn't like really increase the humidity a meaningful amount. What I have heard is successful is putting a bunch of plants together. So if all of your houseplants are kind of grouped together, they can kind of collectively raise the humidity level from evapotranspiration. So as the plant's breathing out, it's actually putting moisture into the air. Some people will keep like little trays of like pebbles and water underneath the plant. That I think also has limited effect. You can do things like that and it's not going to hurt anything. The best way to like really increase humidity would be to put them in like an enclosed chamber.
In the bathroom.
So the bathroom, yeah.
If you come to our house, we have a plant in our bathroom.
It's true. Yeah, we have a little lamp that's constantly shining on it all day. Some people will go to like IKEA and get those like glass cabinets, you know what I'm talking about? And then they'll like put like humidifiers in it and create like this little kind of mini greenhouse and like out of the cabinet. So you can do stuff like that. But the low tech way and easiest way is just put all your plants together, and that has a helpful effect.
That's cool.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Question about propagating the succulents.
Mm-hmm.
So I was told already that you should just pick the leaves off and let them lay on top of soil and dry out completely.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds really bizarre to me, but is it actually true?
Yeah. So the way it works here, let's see if I can get a leaf. These are all kind of chopped off at the bottom. Let me get a slightly better one. Yeah. So from what I understand, it'll actually start growing from the tip here.
Yeah.
And it will send roots down, and then the plant part up.
Okay.
So yeah, and if you bury it, it'll essentially rot is generally what happens. So yeah, keeping it like evenly moist, like misting it each day, can help kind of keep, not like waterlogging it, but keep enough moisture so the roots, as it's sending them out, don't dry out, and the soil doesn't like become like hard pan, kind of cakey, because then the roots can't get through either. So yeah, you can just set them on top and it'll start growing. Yeah,
That's cool.
So some succulents are easier to do that with others, though. Your Echeverias, I don't have any with me. They're kind of like almost star-shaped and have like kind of send out leaves like in like circles and kind of have a little rose shape at the top. Those are really easy. The donkey tail plant that I had a picture of, those are pretty easy as well. Hello. And then of course this one is also generally pretty easy to do that. So if it's hard to do with the leaf, succulents are pretty forgiving generally from like branch cuttings as well. So if I had something like this whole branch here, I would just kind of snip it into pieces like you were saying actually, and bury a portion of it and let it grow out that way. So yeah. I saw you had another question. Yeah.
You know, explain about fertilizer, because I keep hearing about it and I have no idea what to do with it.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So with houseplants, I tend to not stress too much about fertilizer unless the plant like is visibly showing some signs of like nutrient deficiency. Things like yellowing leaves might be, if like I know it's got light and it wouldn't be burned from something and I'm watering it well, that a nutrient deficiency might be a potential thing. I think one of the reasons I haven't really run into fertilizer problems generally is that I'm consistently moving my plants up into bigger pots. So as the plant's growing, it needs more space. And so I'm always telling Bree,
Bigger pot.
we need a bigger pot. This plant needs a bigger pot. And then when I do that, I'm adding new soil, putting like more wood in the bottom, adding more mulch, kind of adding these organic fertilizers just as I'm repotting plants. And that in my experience, has met a lot of the fertilizer needs. I think a lot of people with houseplants especially, like if you're buying fertilizers, you tend to over fertilize and the plant just doesn't need all of that. So yeah, I don't know if that totally answered your question.
Okay, so I don't need to go find fertilizer and put it on my plants or they'll die.
I would say no, don't worry about that. Yeah. I will say, so when we lived in Salem, I had a fish tank, and there was a lady who would every week pay like $2 a gallon for like my fish water. And she was telling me one day, like, oh man, my Monstera, it's just come alive ever since I started buying like fish water from you. And I'm like, cool, I'm just literally making money giving you my sticky water. It was just so great. So, I mean, I think for some plants, it's maybe more of a like necessity, especially like your more challenging house plants. But a lot of these, like a snake plant, grows so slowly that it's not gonna. You don't need to like go out and buy fertilizers for it, in my experience. So, yeah, if you're taking care of the soil and a lot of the other ways we talked about, I think that'll cover it for you. So, yeah. Other questions? You mentioned propagation. Did you have any more follow-up questions?
I was just curious what the best method for this succulent was, but you already answered that.
Yeah. Potting it up a little bit. The biggest challenge I think with like a succulent like this is, and with all cuttings actually, is getting it to root before the plant rots. And not letting the plant completely dry out. So this is an advantage succulents have in that they already hold a lot of water in their like tissue.
Yeah.
So basically you're trying to not let it rot. A little bit of water in the soil is helpful for it, starting that process of sending out roots, but you don't want to like every day be watering it. Actually.
Sure. That makes sense.
For something like a coleus, fun fact, this is actually a cutting that I took like literally 5 minutes ago. You'd never guess. Coleus is much more like water hungry. I would recommend, you could do it in soil, but that would also benefit from doing like the water method. So just sticking it in water. I would never do that with the succulent, but with something like this, that can work really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, some people will root out cuttings in sand. Just pure sand, like a bag of play sand that you can get from Home Depot for like $5. Because it's sterile a lot of the times and it lets water go through, so it's got really good drainage. And then once it's rooted out, they'll transplant it into actual potted soil. So
for succulents or just for anything they're trying to
anything.
Cool.
Yeah. Some people do like figs and things.
Yeah.
All sorts of things.
Wild.
So yeah.
In Papua New Guinea, it's so humid. It's a tropical country. It amazes me how many like tree branches you can just cut off and stick in the ground.
Totally.
And just boom, starts growing.
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy. Plants are wild in what they do to like stay alive and make more of themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any other questions?
For houseplants, for most houseplants, how much is like pruning a thing? Or is that more for
pruning.
like trees, hedges,
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So for pruning, actually, this snake plant would be a good example. So I'll come around because there's a cord in the way. So generally, when you're pruning a house plant, there's two reasons why you would prune. The one is to encourage growth and to remove dying material. So you might notice there's like some leaves here that have yellowed. These are like coming out pretty easily. This one has a little bit of, still kind of connected. I would just cut that off.
Okay.
Right. So if you see that happening, you can just remove it. Say you got a leggy plant. You mentioned actually, you made a really good assessment in saying, oh, this geranium doesn't have like leaves here. So you can actually come back and find like a joint. See how this plant kind of has like these joints here?
Yeah.
You can cut it just above a groove or one of those joints, and it will encourage the plant to send out growth from that spot. I mentioned in like one of my chapel talks about the chemical that is created at the end of the plant, at the very tip of the growing point, that suppresses lateral growth. And so when you cut that end piece, you stop that hormone production, and it triggers the whole rest of the plant all the way down these growth nodes to, lateral growth, lateral growth. We need to start getting to the side because we're not going to get any more light going straight up. Pruning, again, it's plant dependent, but depending on what you need, you can definitely do some pruning. Generally, the more you prune, like if I cut it all the way back like here, I'd get a bit like more bushier of a plant because you'd have all your growth right here as opposed to kind of spread out. So if you want like a more bushier plant, you might do some more pruning.
Oh, I see. Because I used to have a hibiscus.
Okay, yeah.
And that's a little more, we kept it near big windows or outdoors. It's kind of can become a huge thing.
Yeah.
But the more I pruned it back, it just became this really luscious bush thing and put it in a bigger and bigger pot. It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Pruning can do wonders for stimulating new growth and give plants a really new lease on life. There's this guy I watch on YouTube who will cut some of his, he's working outdoors, but he'll cut his woody bushes, elderberries and alders and things like that, flush to the ground, and it'll just send out all this growth next season. So it can really promote a lot of growth. So if you have a leggy plant, maybe your plant is getting a little leggy and it's okay, well, it needs more light, I'm going to move it. You can actually prune it, cut it back, and that might actually stimulate a lot of new regrowth, and then with more light it'll kind of come into its own all over again. So that's a good question. Yes.
Another crazy thing that we did, so I worked in a greenhouse produce farm for a bit, and we would take plants and trim their roots.
Oh,
if
interesting.
you were running out of space in your pot. And that also helps stimulate growth. So it's
interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. I haven't looked into root growth trimming.
I have no idea if we did it right.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think it would definitely help with certain plants, depending on it. I've been thinking a lot about trees and planting trees, and it's always don't disturb the roots, it'll kill the tree. But the houseplant, I think you could definitely it might benefit it in certain contexts. Sometimes if you buy a plant, from the store or something, it'll be super root bound. And in those contexts, it's good to break up the roots and kind of get it to start growing out to the side and whatnot. Because otherwise it can keep kind of just growing in a circle and just kind of strangle itself. So trimming the roots can really do a lot to help with that aspect of it for sure. So
seeds or things that are in hexagon shape to prevent
kind of like this kind of thing.
But like a honeycomb.
Honeycomb. The little really small trays.
Like the little seedlings and they're hexagon shaped.
Hexagon.
So that little size. So that it doesn't go around and around because they run against the fucking house and they go down.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those. That sounds cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, definitely if it's got those hard edges, it's not gonna spin. It's gonna
Supposed to make it go down or just
Yeah. I know when people kind trees from seed and stuff, they'll have these super almost they look kind of like ice cream cones almost. So super tall, and then they're kind of tapered at the bottom. Stuff like that I know is common, but I haven't heard about the honeycombs. I'll have to look into those.
That's cool.
That's interesting. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think my
thoughts?
last one is, how much coffee is too much coffee? I never thought I'd ask that. But I'm talking about plants.
Yes. So coffee grounds, I don't know a hard and fast answer to that question.
Probably
Because
depends.
what I would say though is I've read that coffee grounds are like one of the best like soil amendments, and the reason for that is they're very like low level. Are you guys familiar with PHK numbers? So
Not too much.
it's phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium. You'll see it on like bags of like granulated fertilizer and things like that. So it might have like 5, 8, 5, it's like 5 parts phosphorus, 8 parts nitrogen, 5 parts potassium. So a lot of the current research on like fertilizing plants and whatnot would recommends like even low level distribution of those like trace elements that plants need. And coffee grounds have like a 1-1-1 basically. And it's like slow release because it's decomposed by the microorganisms in the soil. So it's a really good soil amendment in that sense that it doesn't like burn your plants from too much like phosphorus or potassium. It doesn't stymie like the microbiological activity from too much nitrogen, because that's something that'll happen if you put too much nitrogen in the soil. The plant will like be like, oh, nitrogen, I can just gobble this up, and it doesn't actually work with the microbiome to like get the nitrogen from them. That's the way that system works. The mycorrhizal fungi will actually give the trace elements like nitrogen to the plant. In exchange, the plant will give sugars to these microorganisms. And if there's an excess of nitrogen, they won't feed the microorganisms, and then they die off, and you've essentially stopped your soil's ability to feed itself. That was way too much information for your question. But
coffee's a safe bet.
Yes,
that works
absolutely.
well. Now, on that point, like if I had this plant, would I like just dump some like used grounds up here on top, or if possible, would I try to like, airlift this out, put some coffee grounds under? You know what I mean? What's the
just putting it right on top works great, because as you're watering,
and then cover that with something else to keep the moisture in.
No, you could just leave it.
Just
the coffee grounds could become your mulch essentially. Yeah,
perfect. That's
and then
cool.
the microorganisms will kind of eat it from the top, and as you're adding more, it'll keep eating.
That's cool.
And whatnot. So
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, totally. Yeah, you start building soil in your little house plant. So. Another thing you could do is you could like start composting it. So you could donate it to the compost bucket in the guest house, and then I take it down to a compost pile by the greenhouse. By the way, if it ever gets full in there and you're like, "Where's William?" You can just, if you want, you could just take the bucket and dump it behind the greenhouse. And then aged composts are like one of the best soil amendments that you can add to your soil. So coffee grounds can just go into the compost. So if you're ever like this, like up to here with coffee grounds, and it's like, well, if I put any more in, it's going to spill out the side. You can just put it in a compost pile, and it'll eventually end up in the same place. So, yeah, coffee grounds, huge valuable resource. Grab some from PBT. They're always throwing some away. Go to the teacher's lounge here at Mailer or something. I don't know.
I learned I need to drink more coffee. That's what I learned today.
Oh yeah.
Use a French press. Just dumps it
Yeah.
straight.
Yep. It's great.
In Mexico,
You can't move this
we
around.
had all the coffee grounds from our top cafe, and we had some planter beds on the roof of our building, and by the end of it, like there was probably years worth of coffee. Like it was just straight coffee grounds. It was like coffee grounds and concrete dust. That was like our soil in Mexico.
That's so cool. That's the dream right there. Oh man, my kind of
You got
stuff.
the humidity too, so
Oh yeah.
that's
Yeah.
It's actually super dry.
Oh, okay.
Because we were in the desert.
not moving.
So we
Oh,
watered
sorry.
extensively.
I have to push you. Any other questions? Anything else?
Like this.
Oh, that's a great question. That's some sort of speaker thing. I don't actually know.
I'm trying to grow a tree from a seed, and I'm not sure if something went wrong.
Let's see.
So the round thing is the seed hole, and that little yellow thing sprouting up is the sprout. It's been like that for a few weeks. So
Do you know what kind of tree it is?
Poinciana.
Oh, like a poinsettia?
No,
Poin.
like a flame tree kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was in front of one of the mobile homes
Oh,
in
yeah.
Ridge.
I don't know. Yeah, I wish I could help you more on that.
Usually a little more reddish.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
If the white crumbs in your soil are turning yellow, is that a terrible sign?
No, vermiculite will kind of yellow over time. I don't think that's a huge issue. The biggest thing with seeds and like seed germinating is when a seed germinates, that's like kind of its most vulnerable position, and if it dries out, it dies essentially. That's the case with most things. So consistent moisture for seed starting is a huge need. Spinya? Phase into that.
She loves it.
Cool. Sweet.
Well, thanks, Will.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you. Yes. I enjoyed it. I love talking about plants.
This is great.
If you ever have any more questions, if you want to borrow that book, I am not actively using it. You guys are more than welcome to take it down to the guest house and peruse it at your leisure.
Awesome.
Oh, also plants to take. Would anyone like the coleus?